Review film, MLK/FBI. The title of Sam Pollard's MLK/FBI ought to be taken in a real sense. This is a two-dimensional examination concerning an obviously full and, for the FBI, humiliating second in the American political foundation's excessively late past. The narrative is essentially an investigation of people in general and private cells of the men it names up top: Martin Luther King Jr., the suffering picture of dark Americans' battle for social equality during the 1950s and past, and King contemporary J. Edgar Hoover, top of the FBI and, famously, with minimal genuine tact, one of King's generally fervent, groundbreaking, and vigorous public naysayers. The FBI under Hoover had a lot of foes, obviously. Ruler was not really alone, and he was unquestionably a long way from being the lone dark dissident, explicitly, to contain the FBI's promising list of suspected dangers to majority rule system and the American social request. This is a point that Pollard's narrative, which centers around the most recent 10 years of King's life, the tallness of his public activism, shrewdly takes care to detail, widening outward that definitely the second it starts to feel excessively restricted. However, so many of these different figures and their connections to the resulting fights pursued by Hoover's office, the battle on communism, the endeavors to foil anti-war assessment in the Vietnam period, the slander of coordinators chipping away at SOC of America's working poor, all things considered will in general meet, in telling and terrible manners, with King. To such an extent, indeed, that before the finish of MLK/FBI, a watcher may be persuaded that King's story, with its numerous aspects, its numerous privileged insights, isn't just a fundamental account line slicing through the expansive, wavering political assessments of the time, yet in addition, significantly, a vital aspect for understanding the force and capacity of the actual FBI, and through it, Hoover, and through him, the political designs that put forth his attempts conceivable. That is the essential story of this film, which opens with the Montgomery transport blacklister and its resulting political triumphs, a second during which King, while on the FBI's radar, was not at this point the object of its suffering rage, and afterwards steadily extends, in accordance with the FBI's advantage, when it's found that King had close connections to the attorney and one-time communist reformist Stanley Levison, to whom King was presented, in 1956, by Bayard Rustin. From that point, we're getting a move on, led on, in enormous part, by the turns in the FBI's doubts of King. First there's Levison in the dread, felt as high up as the Kennedy White House, that dark activists are playing out the desire of the American communists, to were, by then, public adversary number one. At that point comes the interest in King himself, who stirs up Hoover's anger by proceeding to speak with Levison regardless of alerts, from JFK and Robert Kennedy, both, at the asking of Hoover, to cut off these ties in case they think about the White House. Before long come the wiretaps and bugs, the social occasion of private intel by the FBI, every last bit of it approved by Robert Kennedy, the principal legal officer. Furthermore, from that point comes the drop of the other shoe, the incidental revelation, via bug, that King was having unlawful extramarital illicit relationships. This current, Pollard's film contends, is the point at which the FBI's center movements, and the pivot of its political shock turns out to be unequivocally and inarguably good, a return to the long convention of dehumanizing dark sexuality, delivering it hazardous and carnal, in manners that go before however are most absolutely embodied by D.W. Griffith's The Birth of a Nation. Ruler's sexual coexistence was not pertinent to his presumed socialism or his battle for racial equity. Yet, what these aspects shared, the case they permitted the FBI to begin making, was for King to be viewed as an abnormality, a charlatan, a liar, a danger. Pollard subtleties these turns with what show up, from the start, to be digressions, however which demonstrate themselves to be the most condemning and powerful type of supporting proof. In taking note of the bugs and wiretaps used to keep an eye on King, for instance, Pollard gives us a brief look at the historical backdrop of those strategies, who permitted them, how they worked, who was bothered, and when those techniques before long offered path to Cointreau's dynamic strategies of invasion and disturbance. He delineates actually the for Hoover social request by giving us an exercise on the G-man as open picture, wide, constructed, traditionalist, clean-cut. This is Hoover's America, perfect, irreproachable, fit to be played by famous actors, which they were. Walk a Crooked Mile, the FBI story, with the Hoover appearance, Big Jim McLean. These are the movies that Pollard, who in any case portrays this story altogether through authentic film and photos, uses to recount the FBI's story, which is actually an anecdote about our public impression of the FBI. We've failed to remember, as a culture, that in King's second, he was far less famous among people in general everywhere than Hoover. When King won the Nobel Prize, Hoover, by then mindful of the man's private careless activities, articulated him the world's most famous liar. People in general, that is, the white public, trusted him. There's a ghostly manner by which these men, who met eye to eye just a single time, arise by films and as an indistinguishable American pair, every difficult to completely represent without thorough affirmation of the other. Rulers' private battles are, from multiple points of view, attached to the pressing factors applied by Hoover, especially those applied as a substitute, via the thoughtful Kennedy family and the collective, if additionally hesitant, Lyndon B. Johnson. Hoover's advantage in King, then, appears to be a resolute fixation, and as an apparatus. When King and LBJ become undesirable, Hoover, who had himself become fairly undesirable with the official organization, uses it as a route once again into the White House's acceptable graces. So it goes. The decisions that King and Hoover disclose comparative with the pressing factors they applied to each other just serve, in Pollard's relating of this unpleasant history, to twine these men together firmly. This is all important for what gives Pollard's film its stunning earnestness, its shivering atmosphere of approaching peril. Not the approach of death, in essence, we as a whole definitely realize that King was killed. Furthermore, a considerable number of us are additionally effectively very much aware of the FBI's open hostility toward the man, a rash fierceness that, unintentionally, ensured King's possible affliction by so resolvedly focusing on being on some unacceptable side of history. These are subjects that Pollard essentially addresses. However, the adventure of MLK/FBI is standing out that, knowing the entirety of this, the film slings through history on a rush of agile, quick calls and reactions, and influential to and fro between the points and pictures of these men that has the tight propulsiveness of a procedural spine chiller and the explanatory consideration of energetically sharp and questioning. Which is all deserving of the creative, convincing, quick and sagaciously coordinated treatment Pollard has given in his narrative. Be that as it may, Pollard, who's made a wide scope of movies on subjects as related yet particular as the dramatist August Wilson, post-emancipation oppression, after Douglas Blackman's Slavery by Another Name, and the 2009 Acorn Embarrassment, is excessively savvy to excessively arrange MLK/FBI in the very much trampled, if by and by as yet stunning, past. The film's overall inquiry is, indeed, about the past, yet about the future, and about the fast-approaching chronicle approaching over all that we see here. In 1977, a title card advises us, the FBI was requested to turn its reconnaissance proof of King over to the National Archives, where they stay fixed right up till today. Not for any longer. In February 2027, the seal can be broken. At that point what? MLK/FBI is, from multiple points of view, a film about picture the board, an investigation of the holes between the private fixations and careless activities of extraordinary men and the public impression of these men. Vigilantly, the talking heads utilized all through, including antiquarians, among them David Garrow, late champ of a Pulitzer for a book on King, and Beverly Gage, a specialist on the FBI, close King partners Andrew Young and Clarence Jones, whose creepy records of the period propose that King was profoundly influenced by the danger of his sexual coexistence opening up to the world, and furthermore that he didn't regard their initial alerts, and even a previous FBI specialist from the time, who eminently denounces the arrival of the tapes. These talking heads do a great deal of talking, a ton of describing. Yet, Pollard shrewdly tries not to show their real faces until the end. He soaks us, all things being equal, in the visual chronicle. Furthermore, the musical progression of his recorded visit through the period rhymes with, supports, even inquiries, the specialist's portrayal. The impact is once in a while uncanny. We are recounted the narrative of Coretta Scott King getting a tape on which somebody, her words, can be heard in a bargaining circumstance, and the going with proposal that King execute himself. This is surprising enough as authentic certainty. However, Pollard clears the mat significantly further from under our feet with a clasp of Coretta Scott King talking about her significant other, disclosing to her crowd that she knows him, gets him, better than any other person. The impact can't resist the opportunity to urge us to see behind the words. We understand what she should now know. Similarly, as we probably are aware, in a prior clasp from a New York syndicated program, that a joke about whether King has made the most of his time in the city is actually an articulation, not an inquiry. We've heard what you've been doing.